Alright, welcome back DTF crew. Here's the next project on the horizon for the Z3 with the 2.8 and the manual swap. The final stage in that manual swap is going to be to re-gear the rear differential to make it more drivable. Right now it's got the automatic rear differential still in it, and that's a different gear ratio than what the manual came with. We'll explain that in just a second. The Beamers came with, I think, 3 different case sizes for the differential. I believe they're 144, 188, and 210. And what that is referring to is the diameter of the ring gear inside. As a part of this gear change out, I'm also going to be doing a refresh on the bearings and seals and everything inside. And I've got a few special tools to do that. So here we've got the whole slew of bearings inside. We've got new crush sleeve brackets for the speedometer sensor, seals, O-rings, washers, and whatnot. The next set of ring and pinion gear set. Got some bearing separators and pullers back there as well. We've got the technical specifications from BMW, so I get all the backlash and torque numbers required. I'm going to be using some calipers and a dial caliper. So we also got a magnetic base for that, and we'll be using that to check the lash on the assembly. So the reason for this change is, if we look in the manual here, we see the manual transmission and automatic transmission. And on the manual, you'll see the gear ratios. This is the ZF5SD310. You'll see that 5th gear is a 1-to-1 ratio, as opposed to in the automatic, you've got a 0.72 gear ratio in 4th gear, which is the last gear of that transmission. So the automatic has an overdrive gear in your final position, as opposed to 1-to-1 on the manuals. So when you're driving down the road with a manual transmission and the automatic transmission rear differential, the engine operating RPMs are in the neighborhood of 3,000 RPM at 65 miles an hour, which is going to feel a lot sportier. Right now I don't even start in 1st gear, I start in 2nd gear. And then, yeah, you run out of RPMs real quick going down the expressway, so you're going to lose some fuel economy with that. It feels really sporty, but it's just not good for commuter vehicle, which we do some commuting in this car. So the automatic transmission cars were fitted with a 410 rear differential ratio. The manual transmissions, from what I can tell, came with a 3.15. And I'm actually going to be going down to a 2.93. Part of my reasoning for that is, going turbo next, I'm going to be producing a bit more torque than naturally aspirated. So with the lower ratio, fewer teeth, you get fewer teeth for the same diameter, meaning that they're spread out over the same diameter more, meaning that the base of the teeth or the tooth is wider and it can handle more torque transfer. Somewhere along my searching here, I did find a table that shows the different ratios and what their torque capacities are. So that's my reasoning behind that, and should drive just fine once we get some more power added to it. So with that, we've got the car up on jack stands. I got the front wheels blocked. My idea here is, with this, I've got a transmission jack over there. I'll be able to lift up one wheel side to side and rotate the axles as I need to loosen everything up, and then we'll drop the differential out and go from there. If I have time, I think I'll also paint the casing. So next step. Alright, first order of business, we're going to go ahead and drain the differential of its fluid. Alright, for the time being, I'm going to leave those partially engaged and do the other side the same way, partially engaged. Leaving those engaged will lock the axle from rotating when I go to loosen the front input shaft of to the drive shaft. So then once all three of those regions are loosened, I don't have to worry about it free spinning when it's detached from either location. So. It had 4 bolts attached to that rear subframe, and then the rear diff bushing. And that's all that's holding that in there, aside from the axial attachments. Here's the serial number. Looks like we had some buddies, some mud daubers, making home in there. They probably weren't too happy. I was whining quite a bit. Alright, on to the next phase. Alright, plan of attack here. I unpackaged the new bearing set. The cages with the rollers went in the bath of oil. The outer races went into the freezer, so those will press easier into the casing later on. I numbered those all together so they're staying paired. We finished draining the rest of the oil out of this, and now we'll be ready to crack the back case open. So my game plan with this is to remove everything that I can and then focus my attention on the casing first so I can get the bearing races out, new ones pressed in, and then I'll work on resurfacing everything, fresh coat paint, and then while that is curing, I'll work on the rest of it. So that's the game plan. so on the top of this, there's this cap. That's a retaining cap. It looks like it's peened into the sides of this little impression here, so we'll bend that back out and then maybe use 2 little screwdrivers and kind of pop that out this way, and then we should be able to take that nut off. Alright, sorry for missing out on some of that footage. I took the nut off the end of the pinion so I could remove the flange, input flange. I knocked that off with a hammer after I got the nut off. The nut, I just needed to use a impact wrench real quick and held it in place. Now I'm working on getting this race off the front side of the input shaft. I got this bearing puller here, all squared up in the hole. Nice and easy. There we go. That one's out. This one you can see a little bit of a wear. It's not all the way across evenly, so it wasn't distributing the load across the entire race face. All right, now for the other side. All right, here's where we're at now. I got this front race out already. Now we're working on the inner or the back race for the pinion, and that's the back side of it right there. Now I did try putting my bearing puller in there. Just kept getting cocked sideways, and it wasn't pulling straight, so it wasn't really hooking up as much as I'd like. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is use a pin, or a punch, sorry. Now this is the one I have. As you can see, it doesn't give me much room to play with, so I did go ahead and got some Big Bertha punches here, along with did also upgrade to this 20-ton H-frame hydraulic press, so that'll help me get these races pressed back in a little bit easier. So let's give these big punches a try. Now that I have those, I can probably use a bigger hammer as well. freshly coated. On to the next thing. Alright, this is our left side, I believe. Let's see, I marked it in here. Yeah, there you go, left side. Here's the ring out of it. We'll go ahead and measure the thickness just for posterity. .72. Write that on there. And measure this just in case we need to shift the whole carrier left or right. I already know what the values are and I'll know which way to go. And then also if I need to purchase a secondary set of shims at a different thickness, I know what my overall is if that's needed. Then I will change the overall thickness. Alright, this is the right side. Alright, so we remove the seal. Now on the back side we're going to remove this bearing race. This fits nicely. Got my cross member, and then I've got this bearing and seal tool. Fits right beside there. seal goes in, there's a oil supply hole there. And when I took the original out, I could show you on the other side. Nice catch. Half of that hole is covered up by the seal. So I got a feeling that these were potentially pressed in too far, because you can also see a pretty distinct mark on the axle portion where the seal was riding. It still had room to move in or outward. So I'm gonna press these seals in just short of that hole. Now we're gonna reassemble the carrier. So ring gear is gonna be going on. Go ahead and clean up these bolts. Degrease so they're not lubricated for torquing. Throw a little juice on there. Give it a mix. Yeah. Let those marinate for a minute. Show you what we got going on for torque. All right, here we're looking at the E36 based models. We do have M12 by 1.5 bolts. So joining torque, we're looking at 100 Newton meters plus 10 and a torque angle of 50 plus 5 degrees. So I did pick up this angle measuring device. And then we'll bust out the torque wrench as well. Checking the carrier preload. I'm going to do that by spinning a torque wrench on this flange. I just kind of concocted this little device, piece of flat steel, 2 holes 85 millimeters apart, and then one in the center to attach the torque wrench. And then I found a couple of transmission bolts that fit those threads. I believe the torque's setting for this was between 11 and 23 Newton meters, or sorry, inch pounds, 11 to 23 inch pounds, roughly. So we'll put this on the center, and we'll look as this goes around. Looks like we're right around 10, which is a little bit light, but I also haven't torqued this down all the way, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Around 12 inch pounds, but I do have some rust cleanup that I could probably do on these spacers that might tighten that up a little bit, but it's within spec. So now we're going to go to putting the pinion carrier or pinion in. To start with the front bearing race, we're going to press that right in there. I have been putting these in the freezer just to get them to snug up a little bit easier, and then I'm also using the old bearing here. Alright, so here I'm pressing the pinion into the front bearing, and you're looking to eat up this slack that's in there. The crush ring is what's going to absorb that, and I just met some additional resistance, so that means I'm now into the crush ring. We're just going to get this till most of the slack is gone, and then we'll finish it off with just torquing down the nut. You don't want to overdo the crush sleeve. You only get one shot at that. Alright, pretty snug. Alright, now we're getting ready to set the pinion preload. Made this makeshift holding bar. It's actually out of a clutch fan removal tool set, and then we'll just hit this a couple times with the air hammer or air ratchet, and then periodically check. We're looking for 12 to 23 inch-pounds with the torque gauge. This is just going to be kind of a finesse it in kind of thing. I put a mark on the side of the socket so I can see how much it's spinning. It doesn't take much movement. That feels tighter already. I will say, when I was taking this apart, it didn't register any torque at all on this. So we're at about 5 inch-pounds. So we're almost a third of the way there. See my mark. Alright, now we're about 10. One more hit, we should be in spec. Checking more often than not is probably best here. Either on the right around the 15 mark, 15, 16, so I'm gonna call that good. Now we can remove this piece and reinstall the carrier. That's what's next. Don't want to forget the retaining clip here. Just kind of slides in on over that. Get it all the way seated at the bottom. Once it is, then you just kind of knock the tab of it into either side of that, where that little divot is, and that'll hold the nut in place. Alright, good morning DTF. I've kind of got myself in a little bit of a predicament with this rear differential rebuild. However, it does kind of present itself in another potentially good situation where I can repair something else while I wait for parts, let's just say. So, looking at the differential, kind of where I left off, I was reassembling everything, but I was having a lot of trouble with the rear carrier interfacing with the new pinion. If you take a close look, you can see the size difference between the two pinion gears. Now, I didn't realize that there was a large difference between various gear sets within the medium case 188mm range. So apparently this one was for a 3 series versus that one being for a Z3. Maybe that correlates to E36, E30 rear end. I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but this is the situation I found myself in. So I've got another gear set coming from eBay. Should be here in a couple days. But with the rear differential out of the car, I do have the drive axles disconnected, which is one of the steps required for replacing rear wheel bearings. So now that I have the axles removed, or removed from the differential, it should be easy enough to get them off of the axle housing, or the wheel bearing housing. So I've got new wheel bearings to go in the rear. I'm going to go ahead and start down that path. I'm debating whether I've got the desire to do the rear trailing arm bushings and subframe bushings as well while I'm under here, because I've, at the point of having the rear wheels disassembled and the rear differential out, I'm kind of at the point where I could relatively easily access the R-tabs and the body mount bushings, which also could potentially make the install of the rear diff back into the frame of the subframe a little bit easier, just having some clearance space to wrench the 4 mounting bolts down, because these were pretty tight to get to with the rear subframe installed in the vehicle. So I'm going to start with wheel bearings, and then I'll kind of see where I So here we're looking between 3 and 5 thousandths. And right in the middle at about 4 thousandths of backlash, so that sounds pretty perfect to me. We'll just leave it there. Looking good. Now it's time to fill it. This will probably be the easiest time to do it. Requires 75 weight 140 gear oil, and this one's got a additive for LSD. The amount required for the 6-cylinder engines is 1.7 liters or 1.8 US quarts. This is much easier than pumping it in from underneath the car. Alright, there's one. Plus the fill and drain plugs are already torqued. I'll probably overfill this a little bit, and then we'll just pull the fill plug once it's installed and make sure it's not overfilled. It's looking like 1.8. A little more. There we go. Alright, now the cover can go on. Need to put the Torx back on those, and then the retaining clip for the nut on the front side of the flange, and then that will be a rebuilt, re-geared 188 differential. Looking good. Alright, now that the diff is assembled again, full of fluid, this is pretty much where I'm going to leave this video. The install is pretty much reverse of the removal. And at this point, I'm just going to make it as part of the rear subframe video, which you should also be seeing pretty close in time to the release of this video.